you want to test the mic?
Testing.
Looks good.
All good.
I think so.
Okay. Thank you all for coming to the 2018 AGM of the Glasgow branch of the BCS. There's a sign-in sheet going around, I believe, which is also new and GDPR compliant, which is fun. So tonight, quick agenda. So welcome and introduction. Any apologies? We'll have a quick run through of the minutes from the previous AGM and any matters arising from that. I'll give a short report on the activities of the year. Secretary will give a quick report, and the Treasurer might be able to talk to the numbers, which I don't have a slide prepared for. I'm sorry, Fred, but
I was going to email everyone a report, but it'll happen very shortly.
Cool.
Oh, it's live.
After the reports, we'll have election of office bearers and any other business. And following that, Will has kindly volunteered some people to give some short talks.
I've also volunteered myself, so don't worry.
So, 2017 AGM was held here in the IET on the 11th of September 2017. We were quoted, thankfully. Annual reports. I gave a short report covering what had been a remarkably successful year of the branch after its near collapse at the previous session. And I had set a target of attracting an average of 30 attendees in last session's meetings, and commented on the need to broaden the appeal of the branch to continue to attract new members and retain existing members, and comment on the fact that inclusion and diversity is one of the things that we need to focus on, both in terms of this branch and as a mandate from headquarters. And there are also reports from the Secretary and the Treasurer as to the state of affairs. Elected last year were myself as Chair, Martin Bartos as Vice Chair, Fred Crowson as Treasurer, Will Nelson as Secretary, Events Coordinator and YPG Rep, James Pendonnet as Web Admin and PR, Edwin Gray as Continuing Professional Development and Educational Liaison Officer, Laurie Borthwick as the Inclusion and Diversity Officer, and Alan McBain, Paul Leonard and Callum McDermott as Ordinary Committee members. And I do not believe that there were any other matters arising from those minutes that we need to discuss. So looking back on the past year, I'd like to thank the committee and especially Will for stepping up to 3 roles now, up from previous. I think we've managed to continue the momentum that we built up. Probably haven't quite met the 30 members or 30 attendees per meeting as regular. We achieved it on some occasions at some events, but it's sadly still not par for the course. So I think probably remains our target to get to 30 as a matter of regularity. One of the big things that's been going on with the branch and BCS as an organisation is our journey towards GDPR compliance. So you'll be happy to know that none of us trustworthy committee members have access to any of your personal data anymore, beyond what you happen to put on a sign-in sheet. Headquarters have been going through a number of initiatives to make sure that any personal data held on our members is centrally managed and audited. And the only way that any of us can get access to data for any purpose now is by submitting a request to the member groups team. They are quite happy to provide anonymized data, but it hasn't impacted us too much yet. We have still been able to get sort of geographic distribution information and member counts across the various grades and things, but I suppose the move to using systems like Eventbrite as the booking system has also been motivated by the compliance initiatives. I think the cost of uplifting the existing in-house system BCS had previously was considered too great, and apparently Eventbrite is GDPR compliant, so we're paying Eventbrite now. I have no knowledge of whether Eventbrite actually is GDPR compliant, but move on. So over the past session, we ran 6 talks here in the IET building, mainly in this lecture theatre, but a couple of other rooms as well. We covered a variety of topics. There was an AGM, unfortunately there was no talk last year. Project management, how to guarantee failure. Thank you, Andrew. A talk around the security vulnerabilities in the x86 processor architecture, Meltdown Spectre. Another project management focused talk, Lean Meets Team, talking about building high performing software teams. Tech Digest and networking event, which is the first for us when I've been on the committee as opposed to a talk. We focus more on the networking aspects, and lastly and rather timely, in May we had a talk on GDPR and its implications. Throughout the year we have continued to be a member of the Glasgow City of Science and Innovation. Probably haven't been as actively engaged as we should be. We continue to retweet each other's events, but that has been the limit of our engagement so far.
We kind of meet the requirements of providing open events. So while we're not necessarily doing something branded as Glasgow City of Science, we do actually provide events to the city.
Probably the biggest news that's going to affect us going forward this year is, unfortunately, earlier in the year, the IET have decided that they will be closing the IET teacher building that we are in tonight. So while we have a provisional schedule up until the end of the calendar year in the IET building, we are needing to find a new venue for 2019, which is quite a shame because I don't know, some of you were talking about over coffee earlier. This is, for us, it's quite a good venue. It's a nice space, it's well equipped, it's central, it's relatively cost effective, especially when compared to where we were previously. And I think we're going to be hard pressed to find somewhere of the same quality and the same price point. There have been a few suggestions put forward so far, but we have not made any firm commitments to anyone yet. So the slide that I had up last year at the AGM, and it's still relevant. Member engagement is our number 1 priority. We need to do as much as we can to engage both our membership and the wider tech community. We're not the only people in Glasgow by any manner of means who are running events and talks in tech and related spaces. We need to show our worth going forward and why people should be spending their evenings coming to one of our events. And we're going to aim to continue to have monthly or roughly monthly events covering as many of the various facets of IT as we can. And said last year we need to focus on inclusion and diversity. Laurie is now our inclusion and diversity officer, and I think over the next year, we're going to need to step up our game and definitely. So, Will, I will pass over to you for the secretary's report. I have one slide on there.
Alright, alright, and what are you running? Chrome?
Yes.
Alright,
Not that.
which one? Awesome. Okay, cool. So this is the secretary's report for the AGM. So as mentioned earlier, I wear many hats. Fortunately, they all go together. So I'm the branch secretary. I'm the young professional rep for the branch. I think there can also be young professional reps for institutions and other bodies. So for the Glasgow branch area, I'm the rep, and I'm also the events coordinator. So I've done a bunch of different things in these different roles, and I'm going to cover the BCS in Scotland committee and the news that I've got from them over the last couple of months, which I usually go to in the role as secretary, branch secretary. The BCS in Scotland is, if you've not really heard of them before, they're kind of a meta grouping of the specialist groups and branch memberships that are in Scotland. So they try and meet every couple of months to bring news from HQ, because people on the BCS in Scotland committee usually include council members. So we get news up from HQ, we get news feeding in from the branches, and we get news feeding in from the active specialist groups. So the general news from the last couple of meetings, we have some good news. Sharon Moore, who is a BCS Women's leader, she got an MBE just recently, so we'd like to pass along congratulations to her. A Professor Andrew McGettrick was just awarded a Association of Computing Machinery Presidential Award. He's the first one in the UK to get one, and he's the 24th, I think, to receive one in the world, since they've been going since the mid-80s. We've also got a all-girls team from Linlithgow called Team Acceleries that's going to Singapore, I think December-ish. They're competing in a, let me see if I remember this, computer-controlled carbon dioxide-powered car race or something. So they are the UK team, I think, going forward. So we can support them and wait to hear back. And there is an upcoming conference, the IT and Digital Expo, coming up at the Edinburgh International Convention Centre, 14th of November. I need to check and double make sure, but I believe BCS members should have free attendance. That's what I believe I heard. But if you're interested, definitely check with me, and I'll check with the BCS in Scotland committee. So one of the big groups that the committee focuses on is Scotland IS. And there are two things that are happening and have just happened that I think I should bring to your attention. ScotSoft, which is a really big technology and digital excellence soiree, almost, whole day thing, is happening 2 days from now, I believe. So we have our branch treasurer, Fred, who is... so Fred has kindly found the time to go as a representative to the BCS in Scotland table. He'll be joined by various BCS members, such as the president or chair or president, chair, and a couple other members from HQ and a couple members of academia from Scotland. So hopefully we'll get to hear a little bit about that from when Fred comes back at the next meeting. And Scotland IS also recently, within the last month, I believe, ran a Brexit impact seminar titled Brexit and Scotland's Digital Tech Sector, Discussion with Cabinet Secretary Michael Russell. The BCS in Scotland chair attended it, and he said that it was a very well done, non-hysteric, solemn look at what the impact would actually be going forward on the different ways that Scotland would be impacted on the different exits possible. So I believe I have a note somewhere in my emails for more details. So if that interests you, I can send you the links to the PDF, I think. And from HQ, there's some interesting news. You may not know, but the lease for the HQ building down in London is coming up for renewal, and due to it being just off the Strand and the financial situation, the BCS will be relinquishing that building. So I don't think they've necessarily set where they're going to move yet, but they're moving. The other big news is that it ties into engagement. We really need to engage the current membership, and we really need to get new members in, because the current membership loss is about 12,000 a year. So the BCS membership is currently about 72,000, I believe, and we get in enough members to mostly offset that, but it's still slowly creeping down. Unfortunately, old age and death is a big factor. So us being in Glasgow with 5-7 higher education institutions, we should be getting some new memberships. All right, young professional group hat. So the committee has met recently, and we're going to be having the AGM soon, either next month or November. We have a whole bunch of new collaboration tools brought into play to get us more active talking to each other, because we were doing very infrequent emails to each other. So there's new email lists that hit the whole committee. There's Basecamp. There's email lists to the membership of YPG, and there's a whole bunch of website revamps going on in the back end that should be going live very soon on the main BCS website. So hopefully the different YPG groups will be able to talk to each other a bit better. The committee is definitely more active in talking to each other, and hopefully that means we'll get more events coming out of London rather than being held in London. Because there's quite a few people going, why aren't you holding one near me? And it's a valid question. The YPG is also kind of covering student chapters. So I believe there's been a good push down in England. I believe the number of student chapters is around 35-ish. And that's student groups who have affiliated with the BCS and will be holding events with them and that kind of thing. I am currently trying to grab the current committees of at least 2 student groups in Glasgow. We'll see if I manage to grab them and if they want to become student chapters and if I can point them in the right direction. In student engagement, we have some outstanding invitations to get involved with Glasgow University and Strathclyde University. We just have to actualize it. And there's been a call for networking events for students. So I am currently looking to see if we can either afford to or find a way to either do student-specific networking or bring more events into the schedule to accommodate networking in general and students. And finally, news for us, the Glasgow branch area. As Andrew mentioned, the IIT closes next year. We're going to be very sad to go. We're going to miss them. Okay. Just because they were very helpful and it was a good value proposition. The support here has been excellent. At the moment, the best replacement venue is probably going to be Strathclyde due to its location and the price. No other option that we've looked at is going to be as good as here. So we're going to have some interesting discussions with HQ in the coming months in regards to our budget, because the budget allocation we put in is not going to be sufficient. So I'm sure there'll be some supplementary funding requests going through, and with a financial situation, hopefully we put them in fast enough that we still get into the ring-fenced sum for membership groups. And I believe I mentioned this last year, but I think we're in a better position now with a bit more active membership, at least in response to the emails, that we could possibly start looking at trying to get repeat locations for our meetings when we're streaming them in, say, Stirling, Ayr, and Greenock, because our branch area, as you probably know, is very geographically diverse and takes a long time to get anywhere. So those are 3 locations where the geographic postcode data suggests there's a lot of people who would have a big problem meeting in Glasgow on evenings. So if we can find people who are willing to help out, find either venues for cheap or for free through the universities or higher education institutions there, or companies even, then we could possibly get a lot more engagement locally. I was saying, okay, you don't have to turn up to Glasgow to be involved. head to the college in Ayr, or head to Stirling University or whatever. Plop into a room, and then you can only spend 30 minutes heading back to your house rather than an hour and a half. So hopefully we'll get something sorted this year. Whether or not we actually get it running this year is another question. And the community in Glasgow, as discussion was going on in the tea room earlier, and I think as Andrew mentioned, there's interesting things happening. There's some very strong tech groups, such as the AWS users group that I go to. I think the Microsoft one is pretty good. There's the WordPress group. There's a couple others. They're going well. They have their sponsors. They have their locations. But there's a bunch of other groups that don't necessarily have the same location access. And the CCA was a big player for them. And they're not open yet. They don't know when they're going to be open yet. They may not be around in the next couple of weeks. So there's space there for us, I think, to actually have a discussion with groups and industry and the council. Martin and I can talk about that later. Because there's also, from talking to other various groups, a desire and a need for a good hacker makerspace. So depending on what goes around, with the actual closure and the removal of the Electron Club at the CCA as a viable venue, there may be new impetus to actually get something sorted elsewhere and get a proper purpose venue that would be able to accommodate maybe us, maybe others, but definitely be a kind of central location for a lot of tech groups in the city. So if people are interested in talking about that, learning about that, send me emails, hit me up after this. I'm definitely interested to see what we can do about that. And I believe that is the chair's report. Secretaries. I'm sorry, I wear so many freaking hats. No. Fortunately, I can't be that. So you can't make me. There you go.
I think just to underscore Will's point about membership numbers across BCS total, in Glasgow in the past year, our year-on-year loss is 150 members. We're now standing at, well, probably not today, but when I checked it a few days ago, 1,482 members total, split across the various grades, with ordinary members being the largest subgroup with 588 members, 98 current student members as well, who would potentially become. That's the Glasgow branch membership. So, Treasury report, do you remember this?
I will. Luckily, I've just put it on the website, so it should just turn up. And I can read my copy. Actually, I'll find it by cheating. Okay, that is a link to the Treasurer's report. Yep, I'll drag it to. In fact, I'll open it in a new window and drag it across. I had hoped to actually email this out this afternoon to the list, but I forgot, which was very poor on my behalf. But let's see if I can work out where the mouse is going. Can everybody read that? No, let's not.
Did you latex this?
Of course. Modern computing at its best. It does the job perfectly. It allows me to do all sorts of things. Okay, so this is my report. It's going to be fairly brief. This is my second year as treasurer. This year I've been involved in the BCS conventions both in the autumn and the spring. I also, obviously, quite a few of us went along to the IAT joint meeting that was held at Strathclyde University earlier in the year, which was a good event, and hopefully we'll be having a few more of those in the future.
Just a thank you to the vice chair for chairing that event.
And then myself and Will actually went to the GCU annual prize giving, where a student actually who won the prize was very chuffed to be a new member of the BCS. The actual spend for the year was £3,276.45, which covered the cost of hiring the venues and 4 student awards, although one of those student awards was actually from the previous academic year. And a student from the following 3 universities, you can see there, so Glasgow Caledonian University, Glasgow University and University of Stirling received student prizes this year and became members. Unfortunately, the student prize is something that BCS as a whole is trying to get rid of, and we haven't actually bid again for more student prizes because they're trying to actively kill the student prize approach, because from the BCS's perspective it's not considered the best use of resources. What is supposed to happen is the student charters, and there is supposed to be a special fund that will be given to academics, which will hopefully encourage them to encourage their students to join the BCS, but I don't know exactly the details on that. But hopefully, between myself and Will, we'll actually get the student chapters at all of the 5 universities that are in our area here in the west of Scotland, and hopefully that will increase membership, or at least visibility. And then for next year, as a committee, we've bid for a budget of 4,000, which I'm expecting us to be allocated. I've had nothing back to say it's mad or anything else, but as Will said, that was based on our costings for this place, and there is a chance that it'll be more expensive next year. Having said that, one of the reasons we only spent 3,276 is most of our speakers don't claim any expenses, which actually also helped us for our final talk from Ian Fish, because we flew him up from London, and so there are opportunities like that, and we actually have a budget of £100 per meeting for travel expenses. And with the food budget as well, so in total it comes to about £500 per meeting. So actually we could, even if the venue costs us more, we have a little bit of leeway to play with. Obviously we would like to reimburse some of our speakers' expenses, so hopefully that will encourage speakers to come and talk for us. But actually over the year we will have £800 to spend on that, which hopefully will give us some leeway in terms of what we do. The other point I want to bring up is we are planning on bidding for the International Space App Challenge.
I think at this point it's too late.
Too late. Okay.
Just because venue can. So the International Space Apps Challenge, for those who you don't know, is a yearly hackathon done by NASA. Whatever they did this year, it didn't happen in April like it usually did, and they only gave us about a month and a half. 2 months warning, something like that, for it turning up in October. So we just didn't have the time in order to find a venue, to get a venue locked down. I've been trying. I haven't got through the student groups. I haven't got good other venue considerations because a hackathon is somewhat special in its requirements for power and networking. So at this point, given that we're under a month away and we don't have a venue and we don't have the SFR in,
The SFR is always the biggest problem.
yeah, it's unfortunately we're going to miss it again this year.
But on that, as a branch, I am hoping for us to actually try and organise a bigger event that we can actually get lots of students to, and that's something is slightly different to hopefully appeal to a wider audience. And there is money available, and we actually were budgeted for last year, which we actually gave up, which helped BCS HQ. So hopefully they'll look favourably on us as a branch, because we are quite a big branch submitting something going forward. So if there are any ideas that you or any of your friends may have, then we're obviously keen to hear about them and keen to take them forward. Okay, and that's moving back over here. That's basically all my plans. If anyone wants actually any financial nitty gritty, I do have all the spreadsheets stored somewhere on a hard drive. And I'm happy if anybody wants to go through the accounts to go through them with you. And that's my report for the year.
Thank you, Fred.
You have a question, Martin?
Wait. No, seriously, because they won't hear you.
Thanks a lot for that, Fred. Just a quick question. What is our balance and how does the cash flow work year to year?
Basically, anything that is in credit goes back to HQ and they stick it back in their pot. And then we rebid for a new budget the following year. So basically, in my first year here, we actually overspent because we didn't have a budget. So basically, HQ bailed us out. But the underspend that we had this year basically goes back to HQ. So on a year-on-year basis, we don't have any profit that we can keep. As a branch, you can, if you do events, you can, if they become profitable, you can use that profits and put that somewhere separate that is ring-fenced for your branch. The general branch finances, basically, each year we bid out of the big pot, it's allocated, and if it's not spent, it goes back to the big pot. But there isn't a way of saying, okay, we're going to scrimp for the next 3 years and we'll then have a big pot that we can spend a lot on something. The budgeting doesn't work like that.
And one other question is there policy around whether or not a local branch can engage and get sponsorship from local companies?
Yes, that is a possibility. And again, in fact, Edinburgh branch have done this for some of their events, which have actually been good money spinners for the branch, where they've actually used sponsorship and paid for events. So they actually run an event where people pay to turn up, whether it be a conference, whether it be training, and they've used that as a good way of generating both income and also awareness. So it's something that we as Glasgow branch should be looking forward in the future. And I'm hoping through BCS Scotland and through the Edinburgh branch, which I was hoping to go to their AGM, but unfortunately it's clashing with a holiday for me. Because in fact, that is coming up in early October. So if anybody is available and would like to pop across to Edinburgh and represent us, that would be great. And again, they are an active branch and they've been going quite well. So anything we can steal from them would obviously be useful. And they've got good engagement with their YPGs and their student groups as well. I hope that answers your question.
Perfect, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll run over.
Okay.
So this brings us to the fun part of the night, which is the committee elections. So there have been nominations received. I'm willing to stand as chair again. Fred is willing to stand as treasurer again. Will is willing to stand as all the things again. Secretary, events coordinator and YPG. Martin Bartos has expressed an interest in standing as vice chair again. Eddie Gray has expressed an interest in continuing as the ELO, the educational liaison. Laurie has indicated who'd like to continue as Inclusion and Diversity Officer, and Paul Leonard and Alan McBain have indicated that they would like to continue as ordinary committee members. If there's anyone else?
Just we'd like to pass along well wishes to James Pendunnett. He sent us an email the other night saying that he needs to stand down from his role as webmaster due to health concerns, I think, ongoing health concerns. So we'd like to thank him for many, many years of being on the committee and helping us run the website. But unfortunately.
So if there's anyone else who would like to stand for any committee positions, whether they have a nomination or not, or if anyone would like to take up the post of the webmaster, to speak.
I believe there was also
suggested Lisa Lou.
Yeah. Alright.
Did she?
She hasn't sent anything herself, but we can definitely ask her after this if people are okay with that.
Yeah. I have no problem if she's willing to.
See her tomorrow. She's been in Mauritius. Working.
Never.
I think the committee also has the ability to
Co-opt people, yes.
Alright. Never mind, he finished. Martin was saying that the committee can co-opt people. So if she's interested, then we can co-opt her. Whenever.
Can I ask if Eddie, as well as doing ELO, and I wouldn't mention the band, but I think will he still be doing CPD? Because there should be.
There should be.
Yeah, because CPD should be getting actively promoted at meetings.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
so he's still likely to do it.
Do you have anyone in mind? Because I mean, if he hasn't said that he wants to do CPD, then I don't want to push it on him if he doesn't want to do it. And if there's someone who actually wants to do it, then that's something that could be really good for young professionals and student engagement.
Yeah, because my memory is that it's basically you can capture it from the attendance register, and if memory serves, you get a half a CPD point.
Unfortunately, several years ago they dropped it. They dropped all kind of accreditation for CPD from BCS itself. So going to events and stuff doesn't earn you any credit with the BCS as such. What they did was they moved to a purely self-run CPD system. So while they offer the CPD system for you to track your own progress, there's no branch awarded credit or HQ awarded credit or any kind of tally that employers or others can look up on BCS itself in regards to your professional development, which really sucks.
So you don't really need a CPD officer in the branch then?
I think that there's a place for a CPD officer in that since there is a system that can be used when you're a member. So when you're a member, you get access to the CPD system that BCS runs. That it would be a good way of saying, okay, so join the branch, get access to the system, you get to network, you get to support something, you get to be involved in something, and there's people here to mentor you and guide you and show you how to do this stuff and help you make your portfolio and how to develop your personal development. So that's kind of what at least I see the role as CPD officer being. So.
It really comes into its own when you're doing the chartered. If you're not doing chartered, CPD really has no impact in the BCS.
But it does have an impact depending on your employer. So if you have a CPD system where you have the habit of doing it, then you can just whip it out to you could pull it on request and show it to your employer. So when you're having your what's the other term for it? Personal professional development that the companies usually like PPD. For PPD, you can do CPD. So it's a good thing to get started early. So when you're in your company and you have to do it there, you don't. It's in a place that's portable when you change jobs, rather than inside the company system that you can't take out.
We can also, if we organise events, put them down as CPD. So there is a way through the system of actually getting an accredited talk or things. There are ways of doing it. I don't know the exact details, but there are. So we can actually have events or talks that actually count as CPD, and you can then give a CPD certificate at the end of that event.
Well, it's a per branch thing, right? Though, rather than like actual HQ doing a whole CPD system.
Yes, I think it is. So it's
right. Yeah.
So that's where we could use a CPD officer.
Yeah. So
for managing the CPD side of the events, if we have them, or training.
We can pick up the details of this.
Yeah, the branch can run its own scheme, but there's not a nationwide scheme from BCS. Right.
So is there anyone else in the room who would like to stand for any committee positions?
Yes, join us.
Yeah. Okay. Stick around at the end and give me your name and email address, and we'll figure it out. And I suppose also, if the majority of the positions are going to be uncontested, is there anyone who has any objections that they would like to bring up?
All right, very good.
Sorted.
Choose your weapon. I choose compliments.
Very good. There was a vote for chair a couple of years ago, but you've never challenged it, I guess. I wonder why that is. So, is there any other business?
Yes, there is.
So somebody needs to thank Andy and Fred and Will that isn't Andy, Fred, or Will. So I'd like to do that on behalf of BCS Glasgow, because actually, although we're not a huge crowd here today, we are still in a hell of a lot better place than we were 2 years ago. And actually, things are really improving. But given that we're not a huge crowd today, there is a lot more that we kind of need to do to support them. So, but one part of it is for them to realise that we appreciate the work that they're doing. So, thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Martin.
All right. Any other business people would like to bring up with the committee while you have us at your mercy? Alan, just hold on to it.
Okay. When we had one of our virtual meetings a few months back, there was a mention of perhaps having an event about graduate apprenticeships, degree apprenticeships.
Right, yeah.
I think the feeling was that it's a good way of getting a degree without paying out lots and lots of money. It seems to be getting more prominent in England, and it's badged slightly differently down there. I'm just wondering what people's feelings are about that. When I looked at what was available in England, I felt that the actual subjects were slightly restrictive, but it doesn't make you say that things have changed. So I'm just wondering if that's...
Yeah, there was a talk. It wasn't one of this year's conventions because I wasn't on it. It must have been 18 months ago, one of the BCS conventions where BCS had one of their apprentices who was going through the... I can't remember the name of the English equivalent of the program.
That was 2016, wasn't it? Because I was actually down there for that.
Sure, it was a while ago. And they were talking about the benefits of the program. So definitely up for if we can get someone who's willing to talk on that. Definitely something to talk about.
It is just working quite well down south. and has now been rolled out in Scotland. The mechanics are different, but apparently the overall strategy is pretty much the same. The funding is also a little bit different, and it all comes down to whether your company is English based or Scottish based, how it's processed and where it's processed. But so far, the feedback I've heard from various companies has been quite good.
Good to hear.
And it does mean that you come out with a degree at the end of 4 years.
Definitely something to add to the ideas.
So we're obviously aware from the update that we've heard that BCS are kind of pushing away from student awards as a kind of structure. I know that we've had a little bit of a discussion at some point in the past, kind of groups within the committee about whether or not there might be some other role which increases the profile of BCS that we could potentially engage in. I know that wearing a different hat, the City Council is taking, broadly speaking, digital issues much more seriously than it has done in the past. I wonder whether or not there's any role for us as the professional organisation to be encouraging or participating in some kind of Glasgow Digital Awards as a means of bringing together all the different kind of business and academic kind of activities of digital activities of the city as a kind of place to draw together what's happening, because an awful lot is happening in Glasgow. It just feels as if it's rather disparate, whereas in Edinburgh somehow it's almost as if the critical mass or the kind of concentration of it seems to kind of get things going a little bit better. And I don't know if we can play some kind of part in bringing forward something which does get people focused around the table. And in terms of venues, at least for that, there are kind of obvious venues like the City Chambers that you know, I would hope that it might be possible to persuade might be possible to persuade the use of that space. But you know, broadly speaking, there are a lot of really big companies and there are excellent universities, and we should be doing a little bit more in this space, perhaps. I don't know. That's a kind of provocation.
Oh, sorry. You want to speak? I'm just passing it around.
Right. Very quickly to fling that into the mix, I would say the libraries and Mitchell Library is a venue. Glasgow, it's not Glasgow Library, it's Glasgow Life. They have lots of digital inclusion policies and programs, and I think that's a potential.
As in terms of engagement with industry, and because you were mentioning kind of digital awards, so I guess from a Glasgow perspective, it would actually mean getting kind of everyone who does, who's involved in technology, at some point whatsoever. So it means a lot of industry. So I know as a professional organisation, BCS probably relies on members to join, but is there a kind of relationship and engagement on the other way around, where BCS actually tries to interact a bit more with the different organisations, industries, or council, Glasgow Live, whatever, and say we are basically just a community, and can we do something together rather than having separate feeds? And even though members kind of individually go to have a membership because they want to, can we actually go there and say maybe we can get together and actually discuss this a bit differently?
So there's two approaches that the BCS has in regards to this. So you have BCS HQ, which has one or two members that actively go out and go to the industry and big organizations, and they try and get organizational memberships, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. and then you have the branches that have the ability to form groups and such and talk with people in their areas. The trick with the branches is that we just need more people in order to do the things because everyone's a volunteer, and so we'd love to do more. We just need more people. So it's a good thing you're joining.
Two bits of history, although they might be closer to archaeology, given that they were in the late 80s. Which was the last time I was on the committee, 89, 90. We ran a competition for schools. That had a couple of advantages. One, it attracted a new generation and their parents into the BCS and understanding what the BCS was. At that time, I was the CIO at Britoil, BNOC, BP, call it what you will, at 301 St Vincent Street, which comes to your point. There's a very nice theatre in the midst of 301 St Vincent Street. I don't know who's got it. Was Scottish Amicable. I don't know who's got that building now at 301 St Vincent Street. There's a nice 300-seater theatre there that you might be able to get for this kind of event if we go knocking on the door. The other one about business. I'm a member of the IOD. I don't know if anybody else is, but one of the things that strikes me is that there may be potential for joint sessions, education sessions with the IOD, offering advice, guidance, call it what you will, on the role of a director in the management of an IT department.
You've nominated yourself as a runner, Alan. You can't escape it now.
Since we're talking about venues, I work for Scottish Power and we have a brand new shiny building. And I know, yeah, it's a bit too big. And I know we've been having different organisations, Stonewall from a diversity and inclusion perspective, Berkeley is kind of introducing things, and we have a, I guess it's 300, 400 seat auditorium as a venue, or we have a training room for kind of 50 people. So I don't know if this is the right time to talk about venues, but it might be. So, yeah, if because you were mentioning kind of joint events and there's a night department, and if we're thinking of having people talk, trying to find someone from different organisations, so I can always ask.
Yeah, definitely.
You know.
Appreciated, yeah. Thank you.
JP Morgan has also been mentioned as a potential venue.
Oh,
As your group meets there, and they don't just have a larger venue; they have the cafeteria area which they can use as well, with projection facilities, etc., and they can provide a certain amount of refreshment through the cafeteria as well.
well, people can either get me contact details or specifics, such as whether or not, like, what cost or what we'd have to do for doing it, and then we can do a reweighing of venues.
I suppose the other advantage of going to places which happen to be embedded within big employers who employ staff with professional skills that kind of match what our membership should be, is that it's an engagement process as well. So we might actually want to actively think about whether or not there are any specific kinds of talks which will then draw in people. In terms of engagement with companies, if there is a list drawn up of people that we can go and door knock and speak to, I'm certainly happy to go and do some of the speaking. If there's somebody, coming with me, if we go kind of, if we're adequately prepared for it and we know what our asks are, because actually I think that might get more results than we might expect if we're selling it more as an issue for the Glasgow tech community coming together and us bringing that about. So I think, I think by all means let's get the kind of information as to who has the assets that we might want to borrow, but then let's also identify who the people are that we might want to actually doorstep, because I think some of this stuff will probably work quite well face to face.
Thanks, Alan. I was just going to say, when we were talking about joint events, BCS Women Scotland do a number of events and have done over the years. We've been at JP Morgan, we've been at Lloyd's, and other places, generally in Edinburgh, not so much in the West Coast. One of the pitfalls we actually had with holding events, and for example was Lloyd's, was everyone had signed up. So by the time you're registering everyone to come in, there's like about a third of the people there, especially events that were oversubscribed, because the staff who were actually on site just didn't turn up. Also, what's happening, I've said to Laurie that on Monday I've got a call with Sharon Moore to talk about what's happening next in the BCS Women Scotland. So I thought it'd be good to get him involved in that, and we can see, because they're quite keen on kind of pushing for the West Coast, not all of Glasgow, but just the West Coast.
And that ticks an inclusion box.
And that ticks an inclusion box for that. Hence why I'm not volunteering for anything else for at least a year.
Another thing that was brought up was potentially not having it on the second Monday of the month. Because a number. Yeah, I know we're different this time, and it's not even the second. Yeah, but a number of people I know who want to come along can't, because it's a Monday, and even not just specifically a Monday, it's the second Monday of the month. Clashes.
All right. Just in case people haven't seen the schedule for the next up until December, we've got 3 or 4 talks slotted in, so it's actually going to be quite full couple of months. I believe there is there's either a Tuesday or Thursday talk, 2 Monday talks, and the times are a bit changed, but yeah. So scheduling was weird the last couple for this chunk, but we got a whole bunch of stuff in. We're doing a few more talks than normal, and if people like that, then we can definitely look at asking for the money or finding some sponsors and stuff to do more talks on a more varying schedule. It's just we were actually getting some people before, so we were keeping the second Monday of the month so we could try and get something regular going again, because there wasn't anything before.
The other good thing we've got going now is that we have a presence on Facebook, and the schedule's coming up on Facebook and it's getting shared out from there. Also on LinkedIn. I know there's not so many.
You have to remind me that group exists, okay?
Yes.
All right. AOCB. Okay. Do people want to take 5, get refreshments, and come back for the quick lightning talks? All right.
Thank you all for your time attending the AGM portion of tonight.
For anyone still watching on live stream, as you may have heard, we're going to take about 5 or so minutes, probably count for 10. So if you're still hanging with us, grab a drink, take a break, come back in 10 minutes, and we should have our lightning talks with a variety of speakers on a variety of topics. Thank you for hanging with us. Sorry.
I think the way the mailing list systems work in BCS, we'll probably end up doing the list membership will probably end up doing a lot of membership. Yes, yeah, I've received all this, so that's what
Oh, Douglas, right? Yeah. Awesome. Nice to meet you. Should we 10 or 15? 15? good. Alright, Mike's over. Give me a sec to pull up the actual right slide. Alright, there we go. And we now swap over transition. Full spring of this. I'm waiting for my slide notes to actually load. Yeah, that's about right. Oh. Well, I said like 5 minutes or so, but since we have so few people, just around 5 minutes. At least if this actually loads, I actually put a lot of slide notes in this one, and I actually need that to load, and the slide notes are not loading. All right, close the window. Start again. I don't have PowerPoint installed on this. Oh, is it loading? All right, cool. All right. So the schedule for the lightning talks is here. So we have this talk. Andrew, the speak a different topic. Fred, you're doing something on the kernel, right?
The
OpenBSD kernel. Okay. And then Gabrielle is doing a personal introduction. If anyone else wants to do a personal introduction or something else after that, feel free, because we may or may not have time. We'll probably have time. So I'm going to give you a briefing of kind of what I felt was important news topics in a variety of categories that occurred in the last 12 months since we last met. And there have been some quite interesting items that should have some pretty long-term impact for our industry and our interests. So I thought it was worth to make sure everyone knew about them. So, the internet. One of the interesting things that turned up is that Glasgow City Council is actually going full hog into fiber. So I'd seen their fiber optic plans a couple years back, and it'd been pretty small. And apparently, at the end of December, I think it was last year, they did another sign-on to, I think it was Comms World or something like that, in partnership with City Fiber as well. So if you can see this, this is now pretty much the fiber network that they've mostly rolled out, because I definitely saw them going past Danny's lines the last couple of weeks. So over 506 locations just for the council. They're adding in businesses. I think the plan is to roll it out to residential in a couple years, or give access to residential. So Glasgow's actually, as Martin said, getting quite serious about upping its game, because that's a fully owned, I think, fiber network for the city council. So there's hope. Oh, but see, you don't have to worry about OpenReach with this. It's just fiber. Oh yeah, I have an item for you. Universal service obligation. This has been puttering around for many years from Ofcom, but they've recently done the calls for expressions of interest stage. Just ended on the 20th of August. So I believe 6 big names put in responses. A couple of them were responding, but we don't necessarily want to do it. Unfortunately, it looks like BT will be the big player again. But the thing with universal service obligation is that the obligation is a minimum of 10 megabits down, 1 megabits up, congestion at 50 to 1, and at least 100 gigs per month at a somewhat reasonable cost, depending, but they'll actually be putting in infrastructure to reach people who are currently, say, sitting at 0.2 megabits per second, even on an ADSL2 plus or VDSL line. So I believe the obligation is meant to be in place to be available from 2020. So for the 5%ers and people like that who are at the end of the line, there could be some help coming through. And they are ruling out things like satellite, because they have a latency requirement in there that just says, no, that doesn't work. And we have further development from the R100. The R100 is what the various bodies of Scottish funding have merged into in regards to getting to 100% broadband coverage of the country. So they're aiming to get 30 plus megabits per second by 2021. The Audit Scotland office is like, that's a bit ambitious with your funding of £600 million. But the good news is that as of sometime this year, maybe end of last year, they did actually hit pretty much 95% coverage of the population of Scotland. So I do know people who are still at the end of the line, and it's not good for them. But the current funding has them being looked at first, rather than filling up any easier slots. And you can see from the graph at the top is the 100 line. So in most local authorities, a very strong grouping of the population in each local authority has access to, I think that's 24 megabits per second. Whether or not they're actually quite getting that is always open to debate, but access is definitely getting there. All right, data. There's been some interesting data news. This is a currently developing story. I'm not sure if you guys have picked up on this yet. NCIX is was a Canadian computer seller, operating mostly out of North America. So they had lots of US buyers as well. The thing was that they went bankrupt basically in December, and from the timeline that's emerging, they had a huge bill with their data, with their co-location provider, and the co-location provider went, okay, I'm just seizing all your assets because you have like $150,000 or something owed. And in February, when the auction was going on, we have some first-hand accounts from blog posts on the web going, there's a lot of personally identifying information just laying around. But nothing was done at the time. So fast forward to now, since September, and there was a security researcher who noticed on Craigslist that there was some hard drives being sold that would claim to have personal information on them, basically on Craigslist. So the researcher, being the diligent person that they were, started investigating this. I can send the links around later if you're interested in it, because it's worth a read for just going, what the hell? But basically, what it looks like is that pretty much they had no at-rest encryption. Most of the things were stored in plain text, or all of it was stored in plain text. They have archives going back at least 17 years of all their company data on buyers, companies, and their own employees. They apparently were a credit agency as well for handling credit. So they have like all the social security numbers and the Canadian equivalent. As from what the person who was selling it was saying, was that they probably already exfiltrated a whole bunch of this stuff out to Asia, because they put a whole bunch of it on a network drive location so that the people could access it abroad. Other equipment has been sold, like I think there's 300 missing desktops. The drives have probably been cloned a bunch. So apparently, I think within like the last 2 days, the Information Commissioner equivalent in Canada finally went, oh, we see these news stories popping up. I guess we should do something. So the Mounties went in, and this is a developing story there, and it's an example of how not to do things, really. and why you should be careful with who you trust your data with. So this is something to keep an eye on, and I expect there should be some interesting North American court cases and repercussions coming out of the next year or two of this, because I don't think the Canadians are happy at all. On this, we got some interesting news back over the last couple of months from the European Court of Human Rights, and they ruled that RIPA was not compliant with the human rights conventions. So we have some interesting, so let's see, they were saying there were no real safeguards in it for the individual, insufficient oversight, not enough protection was given to journalistic sources, and it was a violation of the right to freedom of expression. So that's what they ruled on RIPA. And we know that the Investigatory Powers Act replaced it, but basically the continuation of it. So we have an interesting situation going forth over the next couple of months, where we have this court ruling that we're going to have to watch and how it affects what we do with Brexit, basically, and how we deal with making agreements with other partners in the world who will see that this has been handed down and know that the companies based in the UK are under that kind of regime. That works. And we have our first GDPR notice put out by the UK. It's to aggregate IQ. It kind of slipped under the radar because it was hidden. It was kind of hidden within a couple of levels of ICO papers. So this was put out on the 6th of July, and it's an enforcement notice for a possible fine of 20 million euros. Aggregate IQ being a Canadian entity. I know I'm kind of like kidding the Canadians right now, but it just kind of worked out. The stories are there. They of course have appealed and said, "Oh no, we were compliant, whatever." But yeah, the ICO has said that they are in violation of the 5th, 6th, and 14th articles, which are the principles relating to the processing of personal data, the lawfulness of processing, and the information to be provided where personal data has not been obtained from the data subject. So it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out in the courts, because the courts could end up going, no, you don't have jurisdiction, or yes, but for some other reason it can't be applied, or just how this worked out. Because there's a couple other big GDPR cases going through at the moment, especially against Facebook and Google, that are percolating through the individual authorities before they get handed up, I think. But this is the first one put out. Yay us, but let's see if we can actually do anything with it. Alright, actual Brexit. You probably have heard, but the technical notice went out a couple weeks ago, I think it was, for the IT industry in regards to data streams. So the government has advised that they're looking to get an adequacy agreement, basically. But as the RIPA ruling shows, that doesn't look very likely, because the European Union will probably go, you are in violation of human rights. We cannot give you a data adequacy sharing agreement. So there's a fallback that they've suggested called standard contractual clauses. But the thing is that you have to do it per entity that you're doing business with. And the thing is that there's a couple court cases going through at the moment whether or not standard contractual clauses actually gives sufficient protection to data streams. And the only other option is to get certain derogations under Article 49 of the GDPR. So you're looking at a Brexit situation where, for processing of data with the EU, the number one option that the government is trying to go for, they're probably not going to get. The second option that they want you to go for probably is on very unfirm legal footing, and then after that, you're not really going to be able to share data with the EU. So it's going to be interesting times, and that's something to watch very carefully and to see what you can and cannot do, because time is running out. And the last thing that turned up was NVIDIA. So NVIDIA, for people who may not know, graphics card maker, they recently released a new graphics card architecture. And this is notable because they went ahead and stuck tensor cores used in machine learning and AI algorithms directly into the silicon, and they also included ray tracing hardware in it. So you have you now have widely available commercial hardware that can heavily accelerate machine learning processes and do very good visual rendering. So this is going to be something to watch depending on what field you're in with great interest. The only thing that's really annoying about this is that NVIDIA is currently basically a monopoly in the high-end graphics market. So they're setting almost well, at least for the gaming side, they're setting ludicrous prices. I mean, enterprise cards are already ludicrous no matter what you do. So I mean, it's par for course there, but it'd be nice if it was cheaper. But yeah, there's it's just a really interesting platform, and they've been very cagey with reviews and benchmarks at the moment. But it seems like, depending on what your application is, it could be really good for heavily accelerating things. So something to look forward to. And that's that. I will now bring up Andrew's slides. Is it working? Alright, come back. Alright, cool. Is it gonna work? You should just hit next.
I aim to take 5 minutes or thereabouts. I'll keep an eye on the clock, but I suspect at my age my bladder will be the final determinant in how long it takes. I'll go back up one. How does this go up?
Just be back here.
Right. The project I've been working on is with a group of developers from the UK and Romania to establish a data center estate, probably the best word I can use, in Romania. However, I'm going to take the opportunity really to talk more about Romania to give you some idea and dispel some of the thoughts you may have about Romania. It came as a great surprise to me. I've been working out there for 3 years on this project. I've been working out there on various other software projects for the past 5 years. I originally met the team from Romania in Egypt. Yes, that's the way IT works. But you may think of Romania as being a rundown area. This is Brasov, up in the north, which is a superb city, maintained to a great level of cleanliness and maintenance. And it's in the skiing area up there. So, which one? That one? So why Romania? Now, a lot of you may not know where it is. It's right slap bang in the middle of that area you see there, which is one of the reasons it's attractive as a data center development, because it covers a huge part of Western Europe, Saudi Arabia, and emerging Europe and right into Russia. It also plugs the gap between Western Europe and the Far East. There's really nothing much else in between. Yes, you've got India in between, but India is not really in the market of data center provision and in cloud provision at the moment. So it's in a great geographic position. You may not have known that. It's got superb fibre links I'll talk about in a minute. It's got more energy than it knows what to do with. It exports it. And given at the moment we're seeing constraints in energy in the UK and in Germany and in other bits. And it's got the power is largely green, mostly hydroelectric, a good lump of nuclear, and in fact just building another 2 nuclear stations at the moment. And it's got a very skilled IT community. In terms of how well it's connected, you talked there, Will, about Glasgow doing its thing. There's Romania. See how well that's connected to everywhere in the world. You may have thought it was a backwater. It's actually at the hub of almost everything going east-west, north-south. In terms of green, in terms of energy cost, it's amongst the lowest in Europe. That's on the left-hand side there. In terms of it being green, it's substantially greener than most of Europe and most of the European provision. In terms of prices, here's some comparisons. In terms of rental of your property, it's 86% lower than in London, i.e. it's 14% of the cost in London. An IT individual earning €1,700 a month there to achieve the same salary, the same level of living in London is damn near €6,000. It's a very good place to be. It's got a highly educated workforce. It's a long tradition in IT and in maths and in logic and in philosophy. It produces large numbers of very highly qualified IT people. And it was them first found in Egypt, and then I worked again with them in Saudi Arabia. They're very good. High quality, available, very cost effective, and it's embedded in the education system. In terms of speaking languages, the likes of Oracle have understood this. Oracle have got 6,000 people in Romania managing their support systems for Germany and the UK. German, Russian, English, some Hungarian, some Greek, and some Turkish because of the historic links. Tremendous IT staff speaking many languages. You read that? Corporate income tax is 16% as opposed to 22% here. Personal income tax across the piece is only 10%. And if you're an IT or communications professional, you're exempt. You pay no tax. Yes. Now you see why it's an attractive place to work. In terms of construction costs, and we're building a lot of stuff out there, I'll tell you about that in a second. It's the lowest construction costs in all of Europe. So it's not just the guys you have knocking around your door and the guys sitting outside Morrison selling you big issue. This is a highly technical, highly attractive place to be. It's a lot more than you would think from what you read in the press. What we're developing, it's an old car factory. It was a car factory that produced the Romanian equivalent of the Land Rover and sold it all over the Soviet states. When the Soviet Union collapsed and communism collapsed there, that became, and the man I'm working with, a man by the name of Nikolai Ratiu, he bought the entire car factory. It has, at the moment, 80 megawatts of power. Yes. More power than you can shake a stick at. It's also got its own natural gas feed and various other things that will allow us to take it up to about 120 megawatts. You're struggling to get anything in UK, Europe, anywhere else. It's situated on the edge of the Carpathian Mountains, which is what you can see in the back, and this is in Transylvania. The Romans named it Transylvania because of all the trees, for those of you who did any Latin at all. The advantage of that is it's high enough up that for 95% of the year you can use natural cooling. It's very temperate, very efficient from running data centers. What we intended to build in it? Well, the designs are there, the planning's been approved. We're talking with financiers from United Arab Emirates at the moment. We're knocking on the door in China, but basically the design, and we've built them before, is for 6 9-megawatt halls, and then a smaller hall that'll have 15 250 kilowatt halls. All of that will be green. Great place to live. Some of you who watch Top Gear may have seen them driving around the basement of this building. It's actually not just that building, it's the one behind it, which is where all the military stayed. It's now the Marriott Hotel, and it also goes to the building on the left, which is the Administrative Centre. So it's an area that's probably all of the Merchant City up to Blythewood Square, and everything from Caledonian University down to the river. That sits on top of, and you've got the car park, or the basement underneath it. It's well done. You've got on the sides here, you've got the boulevards, and they can eat well. They've been producing wine for 2,000 years, and believe you me, they produce some very, very good wines. So, very quickly, it's the right location, it's got the power, it's got plenty of space for development, it's a member of the EU and the 16+1 framework, which is the cooperation agreement with the UAE. It's got a stable currency. Smart cities. You don't hear much about smart cities here in Scotland. There's a bit. There's a vast number of smart cities that have gone down the road there of, well, it starts usually with LED lighting and then bus management, traffic management and everything else. Vast number of cities pushing that. The planning process is supportive, great connectivity, and the costs are low. I think that was 5 minutes.
Thank you, Andrew. Where's all my stuff? Let me just pull up the next slide deck. Alright, give it a sec for the speakers, the slide notes to load. Oh, probably. It's faster. It seems to. All right. So cool. So an interesting thing happened at the BCS in Scotland meeting I was last at. Apparently, the Open Rights Group was in contact with the committee list because they were kind of interested to see what the BCS's opinion was in regards to online voting trials in Scotland. So the Scottish government has committed itself to running some electronic voting trials. And we can see that news stories have been running lately, semi-recently, this was back in March, that academics and other bodies like trusts and charities are like, oh, this is a good idea, why don't we do it? And I'm not sure if you may have seen it or not, there was a consultation done that finished, I think, back in April, something like that. It was definitely more towards the beginning of the year. There was a consultation on electoral reform that included this kind of thing. And, whoops, all right. Yeah, all right, cool. So they are not doing a set date yet, but it's a commitment of theirs, and it's in their digital strategy, and they keep reaffirming that they're going to do it. So it's kind of coming down the line. So I thought, well, this does actually sound like something that a BCS branch could actually give a good opinion on, especially for people who are involved in the branch. I mean, so I think this would be an interesting thing to form a kind of like project group, something like that, discuss it, maybe pull in some information, pull in some experience, look at some of the systems that will be recommended, look at what the recommendations are, talk to the like local council, to the Scottish government, and give the IT opinion of electronic voting, because I certainly have opinions from being a electoral observer, and I know Martin has opinions from being in the political process. And I'm quite sure there's other people who have opinions, because quite recently this was an opinion that hit the internet from XKCD, and yeah, I think I just think that there needs to be a group like the BCS using the certified IT professionals to give a strong fact-based opinion on whether or not electronic voting could, should, and so yeah. So hopefully in the coming weeks, months, we can get something started. The Open Rights Group is doing a talk further up in Scotland with a couple different areas. They're interested in doing stuff with us later in the year. I'll be trying to organize that, get them talk, give their opinion. So I'll be sending something around the list, and if you're interested, yeah, cool. Reply to it, and we'll probably be doing a lot of stuff virtually or online, like meetings and stuff, but or collections. I don't know. We'll see what we'll form something and see what we want to actually get out of it and go from there. But yeah, there you go. All right, Fred. What do you want?
Just a browser.
Mm-hmm. How about it?
Yep. There's only glasses, so I can't read this. Oh, I'm getting old.
Is this like my birthday suit?
Grab your glasses so I can see what I'm doing. In cloud.
So recently did the UK government did ID card.
I shall need to. Can I get it on both screens?
Windows PS. Disconnect display.
Wouldn't that turn that one off? Oh.
When you disconnect display, there's an option to disconnect.
Duplicate, yes. Yeah, that's good. Oh, let's press this one. Okay, this is just a 5-minute talk about improving kernel security. Talk about Romania. The EuroBSD conference just finished there last weekend in Romania, and one of the talks they gave there was about removing ROP gadgets. And a ROP is a return-oriented programming item. And basically, when you compile your programs, there are things that if you know how to do it, you can get the computer to do something that it shouldn't do. So a little bit about this. Hopefully it doesn't work.
Are you waiting for JavaScript then?
Is JavaScript off?
Yeah. At the top right, yeah.
Ah,
left mouse button. And then second click the button.
oh,
Next one. There we go.
completely trusted, of course.
And then this, and then restart the button.
To refresh it. Okay.
Depends what day. Yeah, but that's it.
Ah, okay, yeah. So, a little bit about OpenBSD. It's a security conscious OS. We're going to mention a few definitions of things like ROPs and what they actually are and what they mean. How we can actually fix a kernel so that we aren't subject to malicious attacks using return-orientated programming. And we'll finish off with any questions at the end. So hopefully a nice quick one. So a little bit of history. In 1995, OpenBSD was born from a fork from NetBSD, and it very quickly became a security-orientated OS because the guy who set it up got hacked, and he didn't like that. And he thought, I never ever want my machines hacked. So he set about doing security audits and developing various features to make his systems safe. So in 2000, I started using OpenBSD, which didn't affect security at all, because I've just been a lucky user rather than actively involved. In 2003, OpenBSD implements something called write or execute. This is where your memory and your applications can either write to a data segment or execute a data segment. You can't do both. And what this means, it basically means that a lot of the ROP approach to things is getting parts of the application to write where it shouldn't and then execute it. So if your data is only ever data and you can't execute it, then you can't get a malicious application to work. So making your malicious applications work is much harder if your memory is write or execute, because you can then separate your data into the write or the execute part to actually do something with the data, and the two can't mix, so it gives you a lot of security that way. And that was implemented in the default OS back in 2003. They also implemented, I have to look this one up, sorry, address space layout randomization. So again, when you've got your memory, you normally start at byte 1 and work your way through filling it up. What this does is it breaks it into pages and then randomly chooses which pages. This does have a cost. It has a cost in actual processing time, and it has a cost in space. But with modern processors and modern memory requirements, you buy a laptop with 16 gig of RAM and you use 1 gig. Actually, if you split it up into 16 pages of 1 gig, you can actually still get a lot of use. So there are costs to these implementations. But one of the things I've noticed that OpenBSD isn't actually that slow, especially on modern hardware. In 2013, they also included something called position-independent executables. This was where all your libraries are actually compiled into your executable, so it doesn't talk to anything else. So if you can't give dodgy data to your application and get it to use a standard library in the wrong way. In 2015, they actually added write or execute to the kernel. So the kernel became, for AMD 64 and SPARC 64 architectures, the actual kernel is no longer everything is executable. So if people manage to give themselves privilege escalation, they still have to fight the write or execute. They also addressed in 2007 something called kernel address randomizing. So basically each kernel, when you start your laptop, the first thing it does is it puts the kernel together. No two kernels are the same. This means that when I want to test whether this exploit works, I can only test it on that kernel, and if I'm successful, it won't work on the kernel I get when I reboot it. So again, it just makes things harder. This made the kernel bigger because you've got a lot of space and a lot of other things in there like stack canaries to try and keep your code safe. Literally just done is something called retguard, and retguard is basically allowing the removal of ROP gadgets. So if you're using an ARM processor, you cannot use a ROP gadget. There are 0 in the OpenBSD kernel. In the AMD 64, so your average Intel kernel, there were 65,000 ROP gadgets before the introduction of the code, which was in August this year. Now it's down to about half of that. And the gadgets that are there are much, much harder to exploit as a result of the work that has just been done by a guy called Todd Mortimer. Yep, they won't get a picture there. So return-orientated programming. This is a way malicious sites use, or malicious coders use, to make your program do something it isn't. And it's to do with how you actually compile your code and your return codes and the actual registers you use on the chips. So using this method with a standard library and standard code, you know that if you can drop something at a certain point, you can get that to then trampoline your code to another point in the code. So basically, it's a way of building blocks to actually say, within my kernel, I've got all these processes. I've got something to write to the kernel. I've got something to write to memory. Those functions are already there because you need them to run your computer. But I'm going to use them so I can do whatever I like. And there's a bit of Python out there called ROP-Gadget, and it will run through any kernel or whatever, and it will give you a shell. So it'll basically give you root on any machine if it can find enough gadgets to string together. So what Todd wanted to do was remove those gadgets from the OpenBSD kernel. So that meant compiler changes. Recently, OpenBSD has moved from the GCC compiler chain for all but, I think it's about 2 architectures where they're still using GCC, but they're using a GCC 3.9 version. So it's really, really, really old. And that's for various political reasons to do with licensing code. Obviously with Clang, because it's MIT licensed, all of the code is moving that way. So basically using the LLVM compiler toolchain, which is what the C library is part of, which is why it's called Clang. And basically all they did was register allocated changes. So instead of using the standard return register, that is pushed to the last. So you basically get your code to recompile, and you only ever do returns when you can control them. And by doing that, he got rid of 50% of the ROP gadgets within the kernel, because he was actually saying we won't use these certain registers, we'll use the more secure ones. And basically from that, identify possible gadgets and replace them with safe alternatives. Yes, in the current AMD4 code, there are still gadgets, but it is now 50% harder at least to actually get them to all chain together. And on his tests, if he ran a kernel from the current stable kernel, it basically got a shell, no problems, using ROP gadgets. Using the new beta code with this in, he couldn't get it. They couldn't find enough gadgets to actually string them all together to actually get the code to operate and give you the root thing. So it provided a safe alternative. Benefits: it removes ROP gadgets, which means it removes a way of malicious people using the code that's actually built into your system against you. 50% reduction in AMD 64 and reduced to 0 in ARM. And this is about also how the code is managed in terms of boundaries. The CISC architecture within x86 is such that actually there's a whole lot of stuff you can do which causes all these problems, which is why the Intel chip has so many problems at the moment. They allow too much to go on. And finally, because RetGuard actually verifies the return address, you can actually use it as a stack protector, and you can use it as a canary. So it'll actually go, hold on, the information I've got back does not match this cookie when I do a check against it in my table. So I know that something's gone wrong. And so the program will then crash, and therefore the actual gadget won't allow you then to get control. So there are other benefits. There has been a cost in terms of size. The kernels are now 5% bigger, and the speed is, they reckon, about 3% slower. But seeing I don't notice most of my computer processes cycles, it doesn't bother me. And finally, just on that, how does this help you? Hopefully, Microsoft will be implementing this on a chipset near you shortly. A lot of the stuff that OpenBSD have done, so the ASLR, the WX, the WORX, has actually come into mainstream programming, and they've taken ideas from OpenBSD and said, yep, we want to implement that because it makes our code softer. Unfortunately, they don't always turn it on by default, so you don't always get the benefit of these security features, but they do eventually become widespread and used. So that's my 5 minutes. And at the end of it, I've got some resources and the Treasurer's report. And so I'll send you the link and I'll send you the Treasurer's report. And that's me. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Since I was coming to this, or to the Glasgow for the first time, I thought it would be kind of appropriate to give you a bit of background about myself. hopefully it will last way less than 5 minutes because I'm really uncomfortable talking about myself for 5 minutes. So my name is Gabriel. I'm originally French and I've been living in Glasgow for about 2 years now. So I studied at Glasgow Uni in 2016 to 2017, or the academic year, and then got a job at Scottish Power, as I mentioned earlier. I have a background in software engineering, so the way studies work in France is a bit different than classic unis in Scotland and in the UK. So we have it's pretty weird. Basically, long story short, I did kind of software engineering with a background of aeronautical engineering, so we have a kind of mixed teachings and kind of modules around air traffic management. Well, where I studied, at least where I studied a lot of air traffic management, air traffic control, and how software kind of operates in all of this. So the kind of things that no one really has to think about when they do some standard programming for websites and stuff. So how to certify software for it to be really reliable, or how to handle safety, and how does everything fit together in a plane. So then I just decided to move to the UK to have an international experience and kind of do something else than staying in France, like the classic. I study there, I'm gonna have a job there, I'm gonna die there. So I just thought, why not move somewhere, and kind of landed in Glasgow a bit, not by mistake, but kind of randomly. A friend of mine said, study at Glasgow Uni. Glasgow's really nice, people are really cool, you could go there. So I applied, got in Glasgow Uni, and did a master's in information security. And that led to my current position at Scottish Power as an IT graduate, joining where I joined the kind of IT security team. So as I mentioned to Fred before, the way the IT department at Scottish Power works is quite different from, well, we don't have that much of a software or programming or kind of software delivery or software factory team, but we're more engaging with different parts of the Scottish Power businesses, so from generation to retail to energy networks, to kind of understand what they want in terms of infrastructure for projects that they need, for things that they develop. We basically do the infrastructure. The IT security team kind of reviews all of this and says, okay, you might want this. Well, pure text data is not that much of them these days, so you might need extra security measures. And then there's a kind of infrastructure, communication operations team that handles basically keeping the lights on, as we like to say it there. And so the security team does from security consultancy to governance, planning, and so a lot of fun stuff. GDPR, the NIST directive for utility, or for kind of critical. I don't even know the remit of this. It's basically for people who have critical national services, so transport, utility, and yeah, making sure that access controls, IT general controls for financial systems are quite strong, and so we can be audited and the regulators happy. So I've been quite enjoying my work. Looking for kind of different opportunity, probably at the end. It's a 2-year graduate program, looking for a different opportunity at the end, and looking to either do a bit more research and kind of do a PhD, or moving to a smaller company, because it's a big company with a lot of interactions across Europe and Americas. The parent group has owns companies in the US, in Mexico, and Brazil. So it's kind of a lot of people, a lot of constraints. So that's me. And so basically I decided to join because I kind of got a membership and subscribed to a lot of stuff. And then basically the Glasgow branch, well, to me it's kind of opportunity to network a bit differently and outside of my work. And it seems that it's it looks like we all have the same challenges to engage with people and to get money and to have events and stuff. I hope I can sort of bring whatever we've been doing at work, either from an IT perspective or from a diversity and inclusion perspective, kind of bring all that networking together and hopefully can, make the Glasgow community a bit more, I don't know, aware of each other, I guess. Not saying that it's not, but saying that if I suppose it can grow even more. So thank you for letting me talk for 5 minutes, and thank you.
Anyone else have anything they'd like to talk about tonight? No? Yes? Yes? No? All right. Well, then that's actually pretty good timing. It's 8:45, so thank you everyone for coming. As I've been showing on most of the slides, there's a meeting coming up in second Monday of December, I think. There you go. October 8th, Monday. We're going to have Kenny Coyle come give us a talk on open source video recording and stuff in a conference setting, I think. He's been doing Academy for many years now, one of the big open source conferences, and he's been one of the people doing all the video recording, getting it processed, getting it online. Was working at STV, now he went over to BBC. So someone with a lot of experience, someone who really knows what they're talking about, and it should be a really good talk. So hopefully you can all come along to that and have a good night.